Hello and welcome to 1% Better. I'm your host, Joe Ferraro. Today, Seth Godin. Those that have been on this journey with me, you know what today means. The pinned tweet at Ferraro on Air reads, "We have no idea who we can become, what we can do, what we can learn, or who we can meet in 365 days. The power of doing the work day after day. The commitment to get 1% better every day." That's what this show is all about. 365 days ago, I was an audience member at a Seth Godin talk, a paying customer. Today, we share the airwaves. What limiting beliefs are you holding on to? What false narratives about your potential, about what you can achieve, have you not let go of yet? I am here to tell you, let it go. Let go. Stop telling yourself the story that limits you and start doing. You are in the right place to get that push. Seth and I talk about the magic of making things, the process of silencing the critics, the urgency of this moment in time. I also want to welcome those new to the project. I am so happy you're here. You can find me in the entire 1% Better project story at 1%betterproject.com. That's all words, O-N-E, %betterproject.com. With that, it's Seth. Enjoy. It is my pleasure to welcome in Seth Godin. Seth, thank you so much for being here.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Seth, you might not remember this, and you do deal with quite a few people, but this is not the first time we've talked between two microphones. Almost a year to the day, December 10th, I was able to go to an event at FIT in New York City, and you did a Q&A, and it was just unbelievable. When I had a chance to talk to you and ask my question, I was a guy who said, before I ask this question, I have to recognize the whitefish sandwich. Do you remember serving a whitefish spread at that buffet during lunch, and how that was, what you true to form, remarkable?
Well, thank you. And yes, I do remember, because every time we do an event, we have to have extensive arguments with the caterers because they want to serve normal food and I want to serve good food.
And that was something that I just thought was over and above. And you've been making a living doing that, going above and beyond. What I'd like to start with is, what do you think you do for a living?
Well, I'm a teacher, and I try to teach people to notice things by telling them something they already knew, but helping them see that it's true. And I've started by teaching canoeing in northern Canada, and now mostly I teach how to make a difference, how to spread an idea, how to lead. But everything I do when I'm doing my best work is a form of teaching.
How long ago was it that you realized that that was the first noun you would use when describing your profession?
Well, you know, when you're coming up, you tend to put yourself in a box so that people have an easier time of picking you. So if you want to get drafted to play for a soccer team, you tell everyone you're a soccer player. And so I would say that when I was a book packager, I would tell people I was a book packager because I wanted them to hire me to be a book packager. But over the last probably 10 to 15 years, I've had the luxury of earning the attention of a large group of people that want to hear from me. So I don't have to worry about them picking me anymore. I just have to show up and serve them.
You use the word earn, and when I think of earn, I think of your daily blog posts. Now, how long have you been doing a daily blog?
Well, daily is a tricky word because it's like made fresh daily. But which day did you make it fresh? I started my email newsletter in 1991 or 92 or 93, but it certainly wasn't a daily practice until probably 10 or 15 years ago. It's hard to tell exactly.
And these days, when you look at that blog, I'm interested in knowing what percentage of the days you wake up feeling like you just don't want to do it today.
Never.
Never?
No, it's a privilege. And, I have a discipline, I have a method, and the way I do it is irrelevant. What's relevant is that you can look at things as work, things you have to do, or you can look at things as an opportunity, things you get to do. And this is a get-to-do thing for me. And the day it stops being a get-to-do thing is the day I'll stop doing it.
I love it. And the reason I ask the question like that is because sometimes it can be tricky, like you said. Someone listening is saying, wow, I just don't feel like making the work. But to confuse that with the idea that you signed up for it, it's a discipline, it's a habit. And as you've often talked about, Saturday Night Live doesn't go on at 11:30 because it's ready. It goes on because it's 11:30. So there's that piece to tease out a bit, isn't there?
Oh, for sure. And the difference between art and work is simple. Artists don't say, oh, I have to make more art. They get to do that. And that what an artist gets to do is show up with something that they want to share. Work is something we've been trained to do as little of as possible because industrialists will always ask us for more. And if you can shift your perspective, then your narrative of how you spend your day will be transformed.
I love that. Now, one of the other things you do in your work, and you've been doing it for years, Seth, is you tend to define words in very clear and simple ways. So if I throw at you a verb like ship, what does that mean?
Well, the act of shipping work is to put it into the world so that others can react, respond, and use it. And I've been associated with this phrase, just ship it, which I've never said, because the word just in that sentence means, what the hell, put it out there. And that's not my thing at all. It's merely ship it. Ship it without a lot of narrative. Ship it without beating yourself up. Ship this important work with focus, merely ship it, and get out of your own head because we need what you've got.
I had that exact conversation with a colleague today, Maria. We talked about the word just is a word that, unless it means having to do with time, it really marginalizes the work. So the word just needs to be removed. Needs to be removed from most language. We thought about that a lot, and just ship it doesn't go with your sensibility.
That's right. And the reason that we want to minimize it is if we minimize it, then we're not as much on the hook. And minimizing it isn't the right answer. Maximizing it isn't the right answer either. Turning it into this fretful, Miss America pageant, all or nothing moment, which I refer to as catastrophizing, that doesn't make our work better either. Merely shipping it, merely breathe, merely walk down the street, merely do your best work, that's sufficient.
What does make our work better in your experience?
I think that if it comes from a place of generosity, which is where the teaching comes in, where we're doing it for someone else to make a change happen, it's different than if we are taking. It's different than if we are manipulating. And so what I encourage people to do is think about how they would be in the world if they didn't have to make an income from this work they're about to do. If the purpose of the work wasn't to get paid, but the purpose of the work was to make a difference. Because it turns out if you make a difference, you'll get paid.
Yeah, and I think that's a lot of the spirit of my mission here. It's one of those things where I would do the podcast, and I do the podcast without getting paid because it's something that you talked about with your blog. It's the feeling that when you go to sleep at night, you didn't have an interview today. You didn't have a conversation with someone who can help you change and can help the lives of others. So I definitely understand where you're coming from. I invited you on a show called 1% Better, and it is about growth and it is about change, and those are two things that you're in the business of. But I also hear you write, and I've read your work where you say good enough can mean good enough. In preparing for our talk, Seth, I was wondering about the tension there, because the idea of daily improvement is something I'm interested in, but that compassion, that self-compassion that you seem to talk about with good enough is something I butt up against. Does that make sense?
Well, maybe. Let me try to parse it out a little bit. If you seek perfect, you are probably hiding that everyone who procrastinates and everyone who is late and everyone who can't figure out how to get it done says they're doing it not because they're lazy or because they're afraid. They say they're doing it because it's not perfect. Well, all of those things they've held back that weren't perfect are stealing because someone could have used them because they were good enough. And the definition of good enough is it's good. It's good enough. Thank you very much. This is what I wanted. I didn't come here to buy perfect from you. I came here to buy the whitefish sandwich that's truly delicious. It's not perfect. You didn't alphabetize all the vegetables and make sure that the molecules in the bread were all aligned. And it's not a platonic ideal. That's not the goal. The goal is that for $9, you gave me a sandwich I'm not going to forget. That's good enough. And you showed up and you gave it to me. You didn't stay home and say, I'm working on the perfect sandwich. You brought me a sandwich that met all of my needs, kept your promise. So if we can walk into the world knowing that, the challenge is it puts us on the hook because now we have to ship it. We can't hide behind it's not perfect. What we have to do is acknowledge the fact that every minute we hold on to it, we're not holding on to it because our customer needs it to be better. We're holding on to it because we're afraid. Now that doesn't contradict at all 1% better because I am really focused on having people do better work, asymptotically approaching some sort of platonic ideal. But it's 11:30. Where's the show? That's what we need from you.
And that is a difference from putting out subpar work. What are some of the indicators for people listening where they know the difference, where they can recognize this isn't quite ready yet? Where do those signposts come in?
Well, now we have to talk about the fact that there's no such thing as the mass market. Different people want different things. That if we look at every important singer, painter, librettist, composer, novelist, every one of them, if they're important, what that means is when their work first came out, almost no one liked it. Almost no one said it was good enough. That's fine. It's fine. I mean, go read the reviews of Catcher in the Rye or To Kill a Mockingbird on Amazon. Plenty of one-star reviews. Totally fine. It's not for them. But once we figure out who it is for, then the definition of good enough is pretty simple. If it's for that person, and that person says you didn't keep your promise, then it's not good enough. On the other hand, if it's for that person, and then she goes off and tells 3 friends, it's remarkable. You kept your promise. You did what you were supposed to do.
But how long did it take you to find who it's for in your work?
25 years.
I laugh because people listening are never willing to wait, right? They never want to wait. But the path that drew you to the stage that night where your basic entire tenet was question and answer, it was only after earned. It was earned over years. So how do we tell people to be patient and ship simultaneously?
I was being a little facetious. It took 25 years to get to the point where I'm not looking for any new people. But there were people all along the way, just not enough of them. And that's the distinction. That if you don't have 10 people who get the joke, if there aren't 10 people who would cross the street for your work, if there aren't 10 people who you could bring something to and they would smile, then you're almost certainly not competent to be doing this work. But once you can get to 10, then you have a chance to delight those 10 people. And if you do, they might tell 10 more people, and now you got 100. And that's how you grow an audience. You don't worry about opening night. You don't worry about your initial ratings. You worry about, did anyone tell anyone else? And all of us, if we have a keyboard, have the privilege of doing that work now, because with that keyboard, we are potentially connected to 2 billion other people.
So as I hear that, I picture 10 people that listen to this podcast. I picture 10 people who value my opinion, and without self-aggrandizing, is that enough now, or do we keep going and doing the work? And what's the line there? Because I've read where you talk about the goal is to have the smallest audience possible and get to do it. And I always wanted a little bit of clarity on that idea.
Well, I use the word viable because the smallest possible audience is 1 person, 0 people. But that's not viable because you can't live on that. What's the smallest audience you could live on? What's the smallest audience that could fuel your work so you could do it again? That audience raises the stakes because you can't say, oh, there's infinity out there somewhere, someone will like it. You say, nope, I only have 400 customers. I'm never going to get more than 400 customers today. 400 customers is all I get today. So I better bring them something extraordinary. But since you only have 400 customers, you know them. You know who they are. You know what they want. You know what they need. You know what their narrative is. That's going to make your work better than if you're sitting there trying to write a monologue for Carol Burnett in her reunion show, because that's everyone, and delighting everyone is really hard.
When you say something that clearly, I'm often wondering, is that a final draft or a shippable draft of thoughts you've had for years and years and years, trying to explain it, trying to get it right, and then all of a sudden when you speak, it sounds as if it's fully formed?
Well, I have a few riffs like that. I'm not sure, and you're very flattering, but I don't know if that was one of them. I think that all of us talk all day long. And if you take good notes, you could learn something from yourself. And when you say something that resonates, try to say it again even better. And it doesn't take that long to cycle your way through. You don't have to have given 1,000 speeches in front of a few million people like I have. You could just pay attention to what you're saying.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. When I was preparing for our talk, I took all kinds of notes, but I promised myself that I would just be present, because you're an expert. You're a man who, if I say something, you've seemed to have thought about it before. So with that spirit in mind, I wanted to ask you today about confidence. I talked to Debbie Millman on the show, and she kind of relayed an idea about confidence and courage. And I'm on this quest to try to figure out, is there a difference between confidence and courage? Is it one that we should be seeking and not the other? I know it's not a fully formed question, but I wonder where Seth Godin comes down on the idea of confidence.
Wow. Okay. So you may know that I'm really into placebos. I think that placebos are some of the best medicine ever invented. You can't overdose. There are no side effects. They don't cost that much. And they work. They work really well. Lots and lots of diseases respond better to placebos than anything else. And it turns out there's placebos in many elements of our life, not just medicine. And I would argue that confidence is a placebo. That if you have confidence, you will do better. That it is pre-wiring your brain for better performance. Therefore, don't interpret confidence as something that arrives after you've earned it. Interpret it as something you could obtain anytime you wanted to improve your performance. That if you start telling yourself the story of confidence and repeat it and train yourself in the story of confidence, your work will get better. And as a result, it will become a self-fulfilling prophecy. It's one of those placebos that ratchet in the right direction. So I think that's really different than courage. Because courage, if we go back to the Wizard of Oz, is not merely the confidence of knowing that you're going to do the best you can do, but I might think it's the willingness to expose yourself to longer odds than might ordinarily be reasonable. So it takes courage to run into a burning building. That's not because you're confident, and it's not because you know it's going to work. It's because it's important enough to do it to save someone's life, even though it might not work. And now the courage of shipping in those situations feels different to me than the confidence, which is the placebo for performance.
I see. So then a cousin of that would be something you write a lot about, which is permission. I know that in your work you talk about people needing permission. Is that different than assurance? I know you talk about that a lot, and I'm thinking about it in my work, where it's, do I need someone to take me to the starting gate? Do I need somebody to tell me everything's going to be okay? How do you go about thinking about those ideas?
Well, I use the word permission very specifically because I wrote a bestseller about a marketing element of permission marketing. So let's not use the word permission. But it is true that I believe that reassurance is futile. That after you're 8 years old, someone reassuring you and telling you everything's going to be okay as a way of giving you fake confidence, it's futile because it'll wear off in 1 minute, and then you need someone to do it again. And it is way better to be able to do your work without reassurance, to train yourself to work without external reassurance, because it's in those areas that you have the best shot at making a difference. Now, there's this idea of being invited to raise your hand, invited to speak up, to the sense that someone gave you a microphone or a stage, that someone said, "You're welcome here." And I think that's priceless. But it doesn't come with, and of course it's going to work great. It's just, here's the microphone, use it if you want to.
So with that, do you like the risk that comes with that?
Well, see, the risk isn't nearly as big as most people think. That the number of people who die giving speeches is very, very low. that the incidence of sudden death among bloggers is close to zero. It feels as risky as running down the savannah with a lion at your tail, but it just feels that way. It's not actually risky. It just feels risky. That when, David Mamet writes a play that's a bomb, he's still David Mamet. He's just not batting 1,000 anymore. So is it risky? Well, I guess it's a little risky, but mostly it's the noise inside your head.
So when you see the work of others that you admire, whether it be Mamet or Dylan, and their work doesn't live up to your expectations, do you approach that from, I don't think critical is the right way, but do you look at it critically, or do you say that's part of the journey?
Oh, I have 54 Bob Dylan albums, and I don't listen to half of them. But it was a good try. I listened to it once, maybe I listened to it 3 times. It was a good try, and he would be Bob Dylan if he got it right every time. So for me, and I hope every supportive fan, cuts the artist some slack. I mean, I know that half my blog posts are below average by definition. But if I didn't write those, I wouldn't be able to write the other ones.
But what's the rubric on being below average of those blog posts?
Well, there isn't a rubric. All I know is that if you have 1,000 of something, 500 of them have to be worse than the other 500.
In theory, right? Yeah, in
so
theory.
I try to make it so that my oldest ones are my worst ones. How do I make this next one better than the one from 7 years ago? Because I've learned something along the way.
You try to make the old ones your worst. I love that. I love the phrasing. That is excellent Seth phrasing. However, I'm wondering, is that a mantra that you're saying to get yourself into the placebo mindset?
No, I'm not. I'm not comparing myself to other people, and I don't spend a lot of time comparing myself to myself. I used to spend more time comparing myself to myself, but a few years ago I realized I will never run as fast as I used to be able to run. I will never swim as far as I used to be able to swim. So comparing myself to myself was becoming a downer. It makes way more sense, I think, to be mindful of this moment as opposed, I can interpret 1% better in so many different ways.
Love it.
But I'm not sure I want to interpret it as I am 1% better on the same clock and on the same rubric and on the same metric that you measured me on yesterday. Because that implies an industrial manufacturing mindset towards Six Sigma quality. And the problem with that is you are asymptotically moving toward a pretty boring place. And go ahead, please.
I was just going to say, and you've never, in my experience, moved deliberately towards that boring place. Your antidote seems to be to dance with the fear.
That's right. So I don't try to make more money this year than I made last year, and I don't try to have more readers this year than I had last year, and I don't try to write the same blog post I wrote 5 years ago, but better. And I didn't write the Permission Marketing Handbook or Purple Cow Volume 2 because I could improve all of it. I could just rewrite old blog posts and old books. I could, and I don't want to, because the fact that I get to do what I do for a living is a miracle. Why would I waste it polishing something instead of making a new thing?
Yeah, and it's thinking like that makes me so glad to be able to speak with you today. But what I wonder about is what you're saying intuitive, and we just have cluttered it up as we've gone through life, or is it counterintuitive because we don't hear your narrative refrained through the land?
I don't think it's intuitive. I think it has been foisted upon us by 120 years of industrialism and its sister, mass marketing. That the only way for the capitalist to succeed is to have factory workers who sign on to the method. And the only way for the mass marketer to succeed is to make people who don't have the latest thing feel inadequate. And when you put those two things together, you end up with the idea that we spent more money last year on self-storage units than movies. that the typical person who is listening to this, which means they have an internet connection and a computer, the typical person who has that has more net worth than the King of France did the last time there was a King of France. That we have more access to more resources than any time in history. And to spend it fretting about whether we got enough stuff for Christmas doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, and without being too precious, what I was wondering about is when you listen to your heart and you think of your purest self, do you think you're just someone who's has been able to silence all that noise and get to the true message?
I have as much noise as the next person.
You do?
Oh, for sure. I've never said you can make this noise go away. You can't.
What does the noise sound like?
It sounds like inadequacy. It sounds like jealousy. It sounds like the persistent voice of a 7th grade gym teacher telling you you're falling behind. It sounds like the narrative of being a fraud or a faker, the narrative of not being competitive enough, the narrative of losing, all of those things. They're in our culture everywhere you turn. You know, the Olympics is a multi-billion-dollar business. Why? You know, there's nothing, no one watches a single figure skater skating. All they're watching is who's going to win, right? Why? Figure skating isn't that much fun to watch, but we're watching the competition because competition is an easy thing to sell us.
People often ask me what it is I love about your work, because I do beat the drum pretty loudly and maybe to the point of annoyance to some, but I won't stop. And I think I figured it out. I think the reason I love your work is because, to my knowledge, you don't sing, you don't dance, you're not a movie star, yet you move people on a daily basis.
Well, that's very kind of you. Thank you.
And when you think about that, and it's 100% genuine and 100% true, Seth, could you, looking back, have ever imagined that you would get the privilege to stand on a stage and answer questions for 3 hours from the most generous place possible, and people leave and say, you've inspired me to make great work? Could you ever have imagined that?
Well, I'm not sure if my answer is going to disappoint you or not, but I'll tell you the truth. So in 1979, 1978, in northern Canada, I started transforming the lives of 10-year-olds and 8-year-olds and 15-year-olds. And it felt just like this. And that's what I've wanted to do ever since. And the opportunity to gain enrollment from someone who wants to go somewhere and to get under their skin is an astonishing privilege. But you're not born to it. It's not DNA. And it doesn't matter who your parents were or how old you were when you started, because all of us have done it a little. All of us have changed the life of a couple people who wanted to hear what we had to say. And the only question is not, can you do it? It's how much will you commit to doing it and how often will you do it?
It feels the same to you that it did in 1979. On
a good day.
But it took you a long and winding road to get here, no?
Oh, for sure. Sure. And there were lots and lots of times when I was dubious that I would get to do it.
You were?
Oh, yeah.
And you did it anyway, and you kept moving, and your path led you to be able to be a writer and be a teacher.
Yeah, I mean, the gatekeeper thing is the first problem. You show up in front of the gatekeeper, which isn't easy, and you say, I got this thing. And they go, nah. And not only do they say nah, they often say, and you're not qualified, and this is a bad idea, and you should give up. And now the gatekeepers are largely leaving the building. So now you show up to the public, and you say, I got this thing. And they say, nothing. Just crickets. Or if you do hear from someone, they say, nah, and then they give you a reason. And the reason is not, some people will like this, but not me. The reason is, there's something wrong with you, and I can't believe you even asked me. So it's hard to keep going because either the gatekeeper is being insulting or the audience is missing, and you have pressure, from family or whatever to go get, quote, a real job. And the problem is the real jobs are leaving, so it's easy to fall into a downward spiral of I'm not good enough and I'm not enough, so I'm stopping. And my argument since I first touched the internet was, this is a magic revolutionary moment, and we're not going to have it for long. It's already lasted longer than I expected. But don't waste it looking at cat videos. You should make something, bring it to the world, say, here, I made this. And if it doesn't work, make something else.
That sentiment reminds me of Purple Cow. I reread it in preparation for our talk, and a line I jotted down. We've been raised with a false belief. We mistakenly believe that criticism leads to failure. Criticism of the project is not criticism of you. Do you still believe that as strongly today as when you wrote it?
Oh, for sure. But it's more than I believe it is there a method there? You know, what kind of person listens to a podcast called 1% Better? I think it's somebody who's seeking methods. And the method has to be to divorce the feedback of the work from feedback of you. Because you as a human will do things that are great, and that doesn't make you great, and you'll do things that are lousy, and that doesn't make you lousy. It merely means you made a thing. And you should learn about what you made and use that information to make a better thing.
That's a lovely thought. I love that. Now, you've somewhat notoriously bristled at the idea of sharing your method. And I won't ask your method out of respect, but I'll ask you, why do you bristle at it?
Because if you use the same pencil I use, it's not going to make your work better. It'll just let you off the hook.
Is it possible that it would be a placebo effect?
Yeah, of course it would. But it could also be a nocebo. And the nocebos are a real problem. And a nocebo is a real thing. I didn't make that up. A nocebo is a placebo that makes things worse. And the internet is filled to the top with people who are busy trying to memorize the methods of people they respect. And they memorize a method. It doesn't work immediately. So instead of digging in deeper, they go looking for another method.
Yeah. There's people foaming at the mouth, hoping I ask you about your morning routine and what do you do every day and what do you do at 4 p.m. and I won't do it. However, I do want to deliver to people listening one thing that you consistently do that when you tell others to do it, it seems to make a real big difference in their life. Is there something you could share on that front?
Oh, I thought you were going to tell me what it was.
No, I don't have that. I'm wondering. I can probably take some guesses.
The single simplest, non-philosophical, tactical thing that you can do if you are listening to this is blog every single day. And I don't care if you use your real name or not. And I don't want you to tell me what you had for lunch. I want you to make a prediction or give some advice every single day. And if you do that every day for 30 days, then you will probably be able to keep doing it because your brain, when it goes to bed, will be thinking about the fact that it needs to say something useful tomorrow. And that if you make an assertion, that assertion will be on the web a month from now and a year from now. And you can go back and look at those assertions and see if you were right or not. And it will make you better at making assertions. So if you get good at making assertions and you get good at being generous in describing ways that things could get better, now you've given your brain this magical confidence placebo, and it can't help but do a better job day after day after day. So it's free, it's fast, it takes 5 minutes a day, and there's no reason in the world not to do it.
As I'm hearing it, I hear the simplicity, I hear the effectiveness of it, and then immediately I turn to my right and I think the critic would rear his ugly head and say, do we really need another blog? It's the same critic that would say to me, do we really need another podcast? Now, and as sure as we're sitting here, I've defied that critic. And without saying I'm proud of myself because people would say, we don't need another podcast. But to me, the podcast is the blog, if you will. But what would your defense be? Not that you have to, but what is your defense to someone who says, do we need another blog?
We don't need another blog, for sure. I didn't suggest that you were doing this because we need another blog. I suggested you were doing this because it would make you better. And we also don't need another person to run the New York City Marathon, thank you very much. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't go running every day. You don't go running to help other people. You go running to help yourself. And this practice of blogging every day, learning how to speak clearly, guess what will happen? You will be in a meeting a month from now where someone actually needs you to say something useful and important, and you will. There's something we do need, and it will work because you've been practicing.
So a person gets done listening to this podcast, they say, I'm going to try it. I'm going to give Seth 30 days. I'm going to give myself 30 days on the blog. Do they go and tell their sister, Nicole? Do they go and tell people at work?
I don't think so. And that's why it's okay with me for you to write it under an assumed name. I don't care if people read it. And you shouldn't have comments on your blog. Remember, different people want different things. You should know it's in the world, that it might be found, but it's okay if it's not, because you're not becoming a professional blogger for a living. You're merely engaging in the practice of sharing thoughts that might be found. Now, sooner or later, it may lead to something you do want to be found. And when that happens, pick your audience really carefully. And I've met Nicole. I'm not sure you should invite her.
Seth, do you enjoy having conversations of this depth?
Oh, this is such a thrill. Sure, absolutely.
Because I'm sitting here listening, and I can't wait to re-listen. And I imagine people that are at my podcast and certainly welcoming in your audience on this. It's what I live for. It's the opportunity to talk to a change maker and to get a clarified, hard-earned perspective. So I appreciate that. First of all, let me say that. And this episode finds us airing right after the new year. I wondered about Seth Godin when it comes to New Year's resolutions or rituals.
Yeah, I don't even celebrate New Year's. It's just such a silly holiday with the staying up late and being cranky the next day and forced joviality. We are launching a new session of the marketing seminar in January because a lot of people do use that moment to take stock and to think about what they ought to do next. I think you probably ought to do that thinking about taking stock once a month, not once a year, but that's pretty much up to you. For me, I shifted my tactics many times over the years. I was a book packager. I did a video product with Isaac Asimov. I invented the idea of videotapes that taught kids how to win at Nintendo games. I built the Guts online game that is now coming back again in terms of trivia online. So zig, zig, zag, zig, zag. And that's thrilling, but exhausting. And so I'm settling into this chopping wood and carrying water of using the media that I have right here at my fingertips to do the teaching that I want to do. So I'm still a restless media entrepreneur, but I don't feel like I need to sit down and write an annual plan that's all about shifting the practice. I'm comfortable with the practice right now. I just have to get uncomfortable with the content because that means it's scary.
You're mentioning the Alt MBA. Who's the Alt MBA for?
Well, actually, I was mentioning the marketing seminar. They're two different things. The Alt MBA is the first intensive we built. It's a 30-day workshop online, 45 countries, that is designed to change the way people see, the way they speak, the way they influence others, the way they make decisions. It doesn't have any videos in it. It's peer coached, and it's extraordinary maker of change. Last session, we had an 84-year-old woman from the Isle of Man. We've had 21-year-olds. We've had people from Google and Lululemon and Microsoft and the head roadie for the Smashing Pumpkins and all around, up and down. It's for people who are thirsty and itching to go to the next level. But it's pretty intense. And a lot of people said to me, we want to focus on what's on our plate, which is marketing, and we really like your voice, so can you add videos? So the marketing seminar is a 100-day seminar that takes place with thousands of other people, where there's 50 videos, each of which comes with dozens or doubles, 2, 3, 5, 10 questions, and you work together in this virtual space to learn how to do modern marketing. So that's basically what we do in my shop. We run those two programs a couple times a year.
Wow. I wonder, and you don't have to share it if you're not comfortable, but I wonder, is there a plan that you have for a project down the road that's totally different, something that's out of the space where you are? Do you have those kind of thoughts?
Well, I almost started a chocolate company. I was a week away. That would have been interesting, but then I met Sean Ascanozzi, and he's a much better person than I am, and so I wouldn't have been helping more of the people he helps than he is. So I said, I'll just support Sean instead of making my own chocolate company.
Is it really that good? I've heard you talk about it.
Well, the best tasting chocolate I've ever had in the United States is called Rogue chocolate, but it's sold out all the time, and it's made by one guy in a little tiny shop. Sean's chocolate is super delicious, and I strongly encourage people to try it. There's now 200 bean-to-bar makers in the United States, and you should find your own. It's a little like wine. What one person likes, another one might not like as much. But Sean is a pioneer with his daughter Lauren in direct trade, meaning if you get a chocolate bar from Ascanozzi, it contains beans that were purchased by him in the country where they were grown from the person who grew them. He goes there once a year. He puts their kids through private school. He has built a transparent, open book management company that is a totally different version of capitalism. And his new book's really good.
I mean, finally, you treat yourself to something, Seth. You're working too hard not to get a little chocolate in your life, no? Do you? On a serious note, though, do you have other indulgences? I wonder if you, when you're treating yourself, what is Seth Godin buying?
Well, I love to listen to music, and I don't have a television, but it's great to be able to sit there and listen to some Paul Desmond or somebody. But I'm not that good. I mean, I buy a lot of action figures and camera lenses and just stuff that I somehow persuade myself is related to my business. But mostly this work that I'm doing and talking to you right now, that's what I like to do.
I'm going to ask you a question that we have nowhere near enough time to sufficiently answer, but I work in education, so I would be remiss to not ask you, how do we fix schools?
Well, my 80,000 word rant at stopstealingdreams.com is free. It's been seen maybe 4 million times. I hope people will read it. If they don't have the patience, there's a TEDx talk with the same name. I hope people will watch it. It's only 18 minutes long. We fix education the only way it's ever been fixed, by having parents speak up. And what they need to do is ask everyone who will listen to them, everyone who's on any payroll that they can find, what is school for? And if we're not clear about what school is for, we shouldn't be surprised if school isn't good. And I think I know what school is for, but I'm not sure parents know. I'm not sure teachers know. I'm not sure students know. I think what school is for has changed, but school hasn't. And if we could get really clear about that disconnect, school will get fixed.
You say that school's for teaching people how to lead and for helping them solve interesting problems, if I'm not mistaken.
Those two things.
So what about someone who would say, well, what about community or reading together or learning with like-minded folks? Does that enter into the mindset?
Sure it does. I think that you have to do that in order to be able to lead.
Got it. So a longer conversation is one in which you can kind of unpack what that school would look like. I mean, literally what it would look like.
Yeah, I mean, we're seeing schools that are getting built, usually for privileged communities, where if you show up with enough momentum at the age of 5, it's possible to completely transform what it is to learn. And these schools are not based on compliance or standardized tests, but they are based on connection and community and activity and inquiry. They gain enrollment. They're not based on mandatory education. They're based on a voluntary enrollment in a journey. And the results these schools report are extraordinary. Part of the reason is they're starting with kids who are into it. Well, why not? That getting people into it is the beginning of the process. And it doesn't make any sense to say, well, this is a good school for kids who hate school. This is a good school for kids with parents who hate their kids. Yes, we need to figure out how to intervene in those situations, but I don't think we should start intervening when the kids are 12. we should start intervening in those situations when the kids are 2 or 1, because all we've got going forward is not a shot at growing more compliant factory workers. The only way we're going to even save our culture, our planet, is by filling it with people who are engaged, who are curious, who are comfortable with each other, who want to lead us through the most interesting problems we've ever seen. And if we don't have those people who are eager to live in a world filled with change, then we're double-crossing them, because we're raising them to go to a world that's like it was when we were kids, but it's not going to be like that when they get there.
You said you were a week away from starting a chocolate company. Is it impossible to imagine a Seth Godin school?
Well, bureaucracy is a real problem for me. And so I run informal, unofficial, non-school schools all the time. But it's hard for me to visualize the commitment that would be necessary for me to build what most people associate with a school.
Final question, Seth. I want to be protective of your time. We've tried to stay in some different themes, some of Seth Godin's greatest hits and some new ideas. I'm going to ask a total non sequitur as my final question. I've been observing from a distance your friendship with Brian Koppelman, and it strikes me as a modern day Tversky and Kahneman. For the creative arts, would you buy that?
No, neither one of us is going to win a Nobel Prize anytime soon.
Anytime soon.
Brian is a magician. He is a generous soul. He is somebody who goes deep in ways that I can't even imagine. He has charisma to spare, and I'm really glad to call him my friend. But I'm not Tversky, and he's not Kahneman, or vice versa.
Fair enough. Seth, I just want to close by saying what so many people say when they have the privilege of having a conversation with you. It's been an honor. It's been a privilege. I don't want to overdo it, but I do want to stay completely sincere when I say launching this podcast, it wasn't easy. You know that. Staying with the podcast and trying to have conversations with people that matter like you, it's not easy. And honestly, from a very sincere place, I want to thank you.
And thank you right back for showing how it's done, and for persisting, and for being generous in the classroom and in your podcast. It's good to know you.
It's a pleasure. He's Seth Godin. Thank you so much for listening to 1% Better.